Marcus Thompson adjusted his red tunic for the 100th time that morning, feeling the weight of the ceremonial sword at his side. At 28, he had been serving as a Queen's Guard at Buckingham Palace for 3 years, standing motionless for hours in the scorching sun and bitter cold. Tourists would snap photos, children would try to make him laugh, and occasionally someone would test his patience by getting too close. But Marcus never flinched, never moved, never broke character. What the public didn't know was that before donning the iconic red uniform and bearskin hat, Marcus had spent 8 years in the British Army's most elite unit. He was a former SAS sniper, one of the best marksmen the regiment had ever produced. His military records were classified, his real identity buried under layers of security clearance that most people would never see. To the world, he was just another ceremonial guard, a living statue whose job was to look impressive and maintain tradition. The transition from active combat to palace duty had been Marcus's choice. After multiple deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, after countless covert operations that officially never happened, he had grown tired of the constant danger and the weight of taking lives. The Queen's Guard offered him something he had never experienced: peace, routine, and a chance to serve his country without pulling a trigger. But peace came with its own challenges. His fellow guards, most of whom had served in regular army units, often made jokes about his quiet demeanor and intense focus. They assumed he was just another soldier who had chosen the easy path, trading real military service for parades and photo opportunities. Marcus never corrected them, never shared his background, never felt the need to prove himself. During their monthly firearms training, however, the teasing reached new levels. The guards were required to maintain their shooting skills, spending time at the military range to ensure they could handle their weapons if needed. Most of the men were decent shots, hitting targets at standard distances with acceptable accuracy. But when Marcus stepped up to the firing line, the comments began. "Look at Thompson trying to be a real soldier," whispered Sergeant Davies, a stocky man from Wales who had served 2 tours in Germany during peacetime. "Bet he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn." Corporal Jenkins, a younger guard who had recently transferred from the Royal Artillery, snickered. "I heard he specifically requested palace duty because he was afraid of real combat. Probably never fired a shot in anger." The range instructor, a gruff veteran named Warrant Officer Palmer, called for silence but couldn't hide his own skepticism. Palmer had heard all the rumors about Thompson, that he was soft, that he had family connections that got him the prestigious posting, that he had never seen real action. The instructor had little patience for soldiers he perceived as having taken shortcuts. "Right then, Thompson," Palmer barked. "Let's see what you're made of. Standard qualification course, 200 meters, 10 rounds. Try not to embarrass yourself." Marcus nodded silently, accepting the rifle. A standard L85A2 assault rifle that felt like a toy in his hands compared to the precision weapons he had once wielded. He checked the weapon methodically, his movements economical and professional, but the other guards interpreted his care as nervousness. "Taking his time because he knows he's going to fail," Davies muttered to Jenkins, loud enough for others to hear. The target range stretched out before them, a series of figure 11 targets positioned at various distances. The qualification course was designed to test basic marksmanship skills that any competent soldier should possess. For Marcus, it was almost insultingly simple, but he understood the need to maintain appearances. As he settled into his firing position, muscle memory took over. His breathing steadied, his heartbeat slowed, and the world around him faded away. This was a state he had entered hundreds of times in far more dangerous circumstances, when a missed shot meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure, between life and death for his teammates. The other guards watched with barely concealed amusement, expecting to witness Thompson's humiliation. They had already begun composing the jokes they would tell back at the barracks, the stories that would cement his reputation as the guard who couldn't shoot straight. Palmer raised his hand, ready to give the firing command. The morning sun cast long shadows across the range, and a slight breeze rustled the grass behind the firing line. Marcus felt completely calm, completely focused, despite knowing that his performance here would determine how his colleagues viewed him for months to come. "In your own time," Palmer called out. "Commence firing." Marcus's first shot rang out across the range, followed immediately by 9 more in rapid succession. The shots were so quick and precise that they almost sounded like a single sustained burst. The electronic scoring system immediately began calculating the results, but Marcus already knew what he had achieved. Perfect grouping. Dead center. Every single shot. The silence that followed was deafening. Palmer lowered his binoculars with a puzzled expression, while the other guards exchanged confused glances. This was not what anyone had expected to see from the quiet guard who never boasted about his abilities. "Must be a malfunction in the system," Davies said uncertainly, but his voice lacked conviction. Palmer walked downrange to inspect the target personally, his boots crunching on the gravel path. When he returned, his face had completely changed. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a mixture of respect and curiosity. 10 out of 10, he announced. Perfect score. Tight grouping you could cover with a 50-pence coin. The guards fell silent, their planned jokes suddenly seeming inappropriate. Marcus simply nodded, set down his rifle, and stepped back from the firing line without comment. He had proven his point without saying a word, but he took no satisfaction in their surprise. What they had witnessed was just a glimpse of skills honed over years of the most demanding training the British military could provide. Marcus had once placed shots at distances that would make their heads spin, under conditions that would terrify most soldiers, but that was a life he had left behind, and he had no intention of explaining himself to men who judged others based on assumptions and gossip. As the training session continued, Marcus noticed the change in atmosphere around him. The jokes stopped, the sideways glances became more respectful, and even Palmer seemed to view him differently. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. His secret was still safe, his past still hidden, but cracks were beginning to show in the facade he had carefully constructed. The days following the range incident passed with an uncomfortable tension that Marcus had not anticipated. Word of his perfect shooting had spread through the guards' quarters like wildfire, but instead of respect, it seemed to generate more suspicion and resentment. During meals in the mess hall, conversations would stop when he entered the room. During duty rotations, his colleagues would watch him more carefully, as if trying to solve a puzzle they couldn't quite understand. Sergeant Davies had become particularly vocal about his doubts. "Nobody shoots that well without serious training," he said during their evening break, addressing the group but clearly intending his words for Marcus. "Makes you wonder what Thompson's hiding, doesn't it? Maybe he's not as green as he pretends to be." Marcus continued polishing his boots, ignoring the bait. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best response was no response at all, but Davies wasn't finished. "I've been thinking about it," Davies continued, warming to his theme. "Perfect grouping like that takes years of practice. Military sniper training, most likely. But Thompson here claims he was just regular infantry before joining the Guard. Something doesn't add up." Corporal Jenkins, eager to curry favor with the sergeant, nodded enthusiastically. "You're right, Sarge. I bet if we did some digging, we'd find out Thompson's got some secrets. Maybe he's one of those special forces types who's too modest to admit it." The irony of Jenkins's statement wasn't lost on Marcus, but he maintained his silence. The truth was exactly what Jenkins had suggested, but Marcus had no intention of confirming their suspicions. His past was classified for good reasons, and his current role required him to maintain his cover, even if it meant enduring their amateur detective work. Warrant Officer Palmer had been equally curious since the range incident. As the senior instructor, he had seen thousands of soldiers shoot over the years, and he knew the difference between natural talent and professional training. Marcus's performance had been too perfect, too effortless to be anything but the result of extensive specialized instruction. Palmer began doing his own investigation, starting with Marcus's service records. What he found only deepened the mystery. Thompson's file showed standard infantry training, deployment to Afghanistan with the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, and a clean service record with several commendations for bravery. But there were gaps, periods where his location and activities were listed simply as classified operations, with no further details. The more Palmer dug, the more intrigued he became. The classified sections of Thompson's record required security clearances that Palmer didn't possess. Requests for additional information were met with polite but firm denials from higher command. Someone, somewhere, wanted Marcus Thompson's real history to remain secret. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his duties with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized his service from the beginning. Standing guard outside Buckingham Palace, he remained motionless for hours, his mind often drifting to memories of very different kinds of waiting. He remembered lying in the Afghan mountains for days, watching enemy positions through high-powered scopes, waiting for the perfect moment to eliminate high-value targets. The patience required for palace duty was nothing compared to what he had endured in hostile territory. But the skills that had kept him alive in combat were becoming harder to hide in peacetime. During a routine security briefing, when Palmer was discussing potential threat scenarios, Marcus found himself automatically analyzing sight lines, identifying sniper positions, and calculating distances and angles. His tactical thinking was so advanced that he had to consciously stop himself from offering suggestions that would reveal his expertise. The breaking point came during a joint training exercise with the Metropolitan Police Armed Response Unit. The guards were participating in a counter-terrorism drill, playing the role of potential targets while the police practiced their protection protocols. The scenario involved a simulated sniper attack on the palace grounds, with the police teams attempting to locate and neutralize the threat. As the exercise began, Marcus watched the police marksmen take their positions. From his vantage point, he could immediately see the flaws in their setup. Their positioning was adequate for crowd control situations, but would be useless against a trained military sniper. The angles were wrong, the cover was insufficient, and their response time would be far too slow against a real threat. Without thinking, Marcus found himself moving into a better position, one that would provide optimal cover while maintaining clear sight lines to potential sniper locations. His movement was so fluid and natural that it caught the attention of Inspector Sarah Chen, the lead officer coordinating the exercise. Chen had 20 years of experience in armed response, including training with military units and international counter-terrorism organizations. She recognized tactical movement when she saw it, and Marcus's positioning was textbook perfect. Better than textbook, actually. It was the kind of intuitive understanding that came only from extensive combat experience. "Excuse me, Guard Thompson," Chen called out, approaching his position. "That's excellent positioning. Where did you learn to move like that?" Marcus realized his mistake immediately. In trying to protect himself and others during the drill, he had revealed training that went far beyond what a ceremonial guard should possess. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him, their suspicions now crystallizing into certainty. "Just common sense, ma'am," Marcus replied, but even he could hear how unconvincing it sounded. Chen studied him carefully. She had worked with enough Special Forces personnel to recognize one when she saw him. Marcus's bearing, his movements, his tactical awareness, everything about him screamed elite military training. But she also understood the need for operational security and discretion. "Of course," she said diplomatically. "Well, your common sense is remarkably well developed." The exercise continued, but Marcus knew the damage was done. Palmer was watching him with undisguised interest. Davies was whispering urgently to Jenkins, and even some of the police officers were giving him curious looks. His carefully maintained cover was beginning to unravel, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could maintain the pretense of being just another guard. That evening, as Marcus prepared for the night shift, Palmer approached him privately. The warrant officer's expression was serious but not hostile. "Thompson," Palmer said quietly, "I've been in the Army for 25 years. I know a professional when I see one. I don't know what your real story is, and maybe I don't need to know. But whatever you did before this posting, you were damn good at it." Marcus met Palmer's gaze steadily. "I'm just here to do my job, sir." "Same as everyone else," Palmer nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But if there's ever a situation where we need someone with specialized skills, I hope you'll step up." As Palmer walked away, Marcus felt a chill of premonition. His past was catching up with him faster than he had anticipated, and he was beginning to realize that some secrets were too big to stay buried forever. The quiet life he had sought was becoming increasingly complicated, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that his most challenging mission was just beginning. The morning of the incident started like any other for Marcus. He arrived at the palace for the changing of the guard ceremony, his red tunic immaculate, his bearskin hat properly positioned, his boots polished to mirror brightness. Tourists were already gathering behind the gates, cameras ready to capture the pageantry that had become synonymous with British tradition. Marcus took his position at the palace entrance, settling into the familiar routine of absolute stillness that his role demanded. Among the crowd, Detective Inspector Sarah Chen moved quietly, her trained eyes scanning faces and behavior patterns. She wasn't there as a tourist. Intelligence reports had indicated potential terrorist activity in central London, and high-profile locations like Buckingham Palace were under heightened surveillance. Chen carried herself with the casual air of a sightseer, but her hand remained close to the concealed radio that connected her to armed response teams positioned throughout the area. The ceremony proceeded normally for the first 20 minutes. The band played, the guards marched in perfect formation, and tourists snapped photos with delight. Marcus remained motionless at his post, but his eyes were constantly moving, scanning the crowd for anything unusual. It was a habit from his SAS days that he had never been able to shake, the perpetual awareness of potential threats. That's when he spotted the man. Standing near the Victoria Memorial, about 200 meters from the palace gates, was a figure that immediately triggered Marcus's threat assessment training. The man was tall and lean, wearing a dark jacket despite the warm weather. More importantly, he was holding what appeared to be a camera with an unusually long lens, but his positioning and body language were all wrong for photography. Marcus had seen enough real snipers to recognize the signs. The man's stance was too stable, his grip too professional, and he kept checking wind direction and elevation markers that photographers wouldn't care about. Most telling of all, he wasn't actually taking pictures. The camera remained fixed in position, aimed not at the ceremony but at a specific point near where Marcus stood. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. This wasn't a photographer or even a terrorist with improvised weapons. This was a professional sniper, and Marcus was in his crosshairs. Without breaking his ceremonial pose, Marcus began calculating angles and distances. The sniper had chosen his position well, elevated with clear sight lines and multiple escape routes. From his current location, the man could eliminate several guards and potentially harm dozens of civilians before security could respond. The police officers Marcus could see were focused on crowd control, not on scanning for long-range threats. Marcus faced an impossible choice. His duty as a Queen's Guard required him to remain motionless regardless of personal danger. Breaking position would create a scene, potentially cause panic, and certainly reveal that he possessed tactical awareness far beyond what his role should require. But his training as an SAS operative demanded immediate action to neutralize the threat and protect innocent lives. The sniper was adjusting his aim, making final preparations for his shot. Marcus estimated he had perhaps 30 seconds before the man fired. In that moment, duty to the crown and duty to humanity aligned, and Marcus made his decision. Still maintaining the appearance of ceremonial stillness, Marcus began to move with microscopic precision. To the casual observer, he appeared unchanged, but every muscle in his body was coiling for action. He shifted his weight imperceptibly, adjusted his grip on his ceremonial rifle, and prepared to move faster than he had since leaving active service. The sniper raised his weapon to firing position. Marcus exploded into motion. In one fluid movement, he dropped to one knee, brought his ceremonial rifle to his shoulder, and acquired the target. The distance was challenging. Nearly 200 meters with an unmodified L85A2 rifle equipped only with basic iron sights. For most soldiers, it would have been an impossible shot. For Marcus, it was exactly the kind of precision shooting that had made him legendary within the SS. The sniper, startled by the sudden movement from what he had assumed was a stationary target, hesitated for a crucial half-second. That hesitation cost him everything. Marcus's shot was perfect. The bullet struck the sniper's weapon, destroying the scope and rendering the rifle useless while the impact knocked the man backward. It was a deliberately non-lethal shot designed to neutralize the threat without killing the attacker. A level of precision that bordered on the supernatural. The crowd erupted in confusion and panic. Tourists screamed and scattered, not understanding what had happened but recognizing the sound of gunfire. Police officers began shouting orders and moving toward the source of the shooting, while palace security initiated lockdown protocols. Detective Inspector Chen, who had witnessed the entire sequence, was already running toward the sniper's position, speaking rapidly into her radio to coordinate the response. She had seen Marcus's shot and recognized it for what it was, an exhibition of marksmanship skill that went far beyond anything a ceremonial guard should possess. Within minutes, Armed response teams had surrounded and apprehended the would-be assassin. The man turned out to be a foreign operative, with known connections to several terrorist organizations. His modified rifle was capable of precise long-range assassination, and intelligence officers would later determine that his target had indeed been the ceremonial guards, with the intention of creating maximum symbolic impact. As the immediate crisis subsided, Marcus found himself surrounded by senior officers, security personnel, and investigators. His single shot had undoubtedly saved lives and prevented a terrorist attack, but it had also completely blown his cover. There was no way to explain how a Queen's Guard had identified a threat at 200 meters and neutralized it with a precision shot that most trained snipers couldn't achieve. Warrant Officer Palmer was the first to reach him, his expression a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. "Thompson," he said quietly, "I think we need to have a very serious conversation about your background." Detective Inspector Chen approached more cautiously, her experienced eyes taking in every detail of Marcus's bearing and equipment. She had already run his name through several databases and was waiting for results that she suspected would be heavily classified. "That was an extraordinary shot, Guard Thompson," she said carefully, "the kind of shooting that suggests very specialized training." Marcus nodded, accepting that his secret was finally out. "Yes, ma'am. I suppose it does." The crowd was still being evacuated. Journalists were arriving on the scene, and Marcus could see his fellow guards staring at him with expressions ranging from amazement to suspicion. His quiet life as an anonymous ceremonial soldier was over, but as he looked at the frightened tourists who were now safe thanks to his intervention, he felt no regret about the choice he had made. The truth would come out now one way or another. After 3 years of hiding his past, Marcus Thompson was about to become the center of attention in a way that would change everything. The only question was how much of his story the authorities would allow the public to know, and whether his sacrifice of anonymity had been worth the lives he had saved. As investigators began processing the scene and taking statements, Marcus realized that his most challenging mission was just beginning. The easy part had been pulling the trigger. Now came the much harder task of explaining why a simple palace guard possessed the skills of Britain's most elite soldiers. Within 2 hours of the shooting, Marcus found himself in a secure room deep within New Scotland Yard, facing a panel of officials whose security clearances were high enough to access his real military records. The transition from palace guard to person of intense interest had been swift and unsettling. Gone was the red tunic and ceremonial sword. Instead, he wore civilian clothes provided by MI5 personnel, who had arrived on scene with remarkable speed. Detective Chief Inspector James Morrison led the questioning, supported by Colonel Patricia Hewitt from Military Intelligence, and a woman who introduced herself only as Ms. Williams, from an agency that remained unnamed. The room was windowless and sterile, designed to be intimidating, but Marcus had been interrogated in far worse conditions during his active service years. "Let's start with the obvious question. Mr. Thompson," Morrison began, consulting a thick file that had clearly been compiled in haste. "How does a ceremonial guard execute a precision shot that neutralized an armed terrorist at 200 meters? Marcus had spent the journey to Scotland Yard preparing for this moment. He understood that his cover was blown, but he also knew that certain operational details needed to remain classified regardless of the circumstances. "I received advanced marksmanship training during my military service," he replied carefully. "I've maintained those skills through regular practice." Colonel Hewitt leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "Mr. Thompson, we've had time to review your official service record. According to these documents, you served with the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers as a standard infantryman. That unit doesn't provide the kind of training necessary for the shot you made today. There are gaps in your record," Ms. Williams added quietly. "Significant periods where your location and activities are classified at levels that require special authorization to access. We're going to need you to fill in those gaps." Marcus had known this moment would come eventually. The shooting had forced him to reveal skills that couldn't be explained by his cover story, and these people were too experienced to accept evasive answers. "I was selected for specialized training," he said finally. "Additional qualifications beyond my basic infantry role. The details of that training and subsequent operations remain classified." Morrison exchanged glances with his colleagues. They all understood what Marcus was implying without saying it directly. In the world of British special operations, There were certain units whose very existence was officially denied, whose members' service records were deliberately obscured to protect both operational security and the individuals involved. "Mr. Thompson," Colonel Hewitt said more gently, "we need to establish whether you pose any security risk to your current posting. Your background check for the Queen's Guard was thorough, but it was based on incomplete information. We need the full picture." For the first time since the questioning began, Marcus smiled slightly. "Ma'am, if I posed a security risk, I wouldn't have been assigned to guard the sovereign. Someone with appropriate clearance vetted my appointment. They knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of." Ms. Williams consulted her own files, which appeared to contain information that the others didn't have access to. After several minutes of silent reading, she looked up with an expression of dawning understanding. "Your transfer to the Queen's Guard wasn't a career change," she said slowly. "It was an assignment. You're still on active duty, aren't you? This whole ceremonial guard role is cover for something else." Marcus maintained his silence, but his expression confirmed her suspicion. The truth was more complex than any of them had realized. His assignment to the Queen's Guard hadn't been a retreat from active service. It had been a continuation of it in a different form. Detective Inspector Chen, who had been observing the questioning from the back of the room, finally spoke up. "The terrorist we arrested today, his target selection wasn't random, was it? He wasn't just trying to create symbolic carnage. He was specifically targeting you." The room fell silent as the implications of her statement sank in. If Chen was correct, then the terrorist attack hadn't been a random strike against British symbols, but a targeted assassination attempt against a specific individual. Morrison turned to Marcus with renewed urgency. "Is there something you haven't told us? Are you aware of any specific threats against your person?" Marcus considered his options carefully. The truth was that his former role in the SAS had made him numerous enemies around the world. His sniper skills had been used to eliminate high-value targets in multiple theaters of operation, and there were undoubtedly people who would pay handsomely for revenge against him. His assignment to the Queen's Guard had been partially motivated by the need to keep him in a secure environment while maintaining his active status. "My previous operational history may have generated some personal animosity," he admitted. "It's possible that my location had been compromised." Colonel Hewitt was already reaching for her secure phone. "We need to contact Hereford immediately. If Thompson's cover has been blown, there could be additional threats we're not aware of." Hereford was the headquarters of the SAS, and Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest at the mention of the base. He had hoped never to be recalled to that world, but the events of the morning had made that hope unrealistic. "There's something else," Ms. Williams said, consulting her files again. "The weapon the terrorist was using, it's not standard issue for any known terrorist organization. The modifications suggest military-grade precision equipment, the kind typically used by government agencies or private military contractors. The implication was clear. Whoever had sent the assassin had resources and connections that went far beyond typical terrorist cells. This was a professional operation, planned and executed by people with significant backing. Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. His attempt to live a quiet life in service to the crown had been shattered by the very skills that had once made him invaluable to his country. The enemies he had made during his classified operations had found him, and his presence at the palace now posed a threat to everyone around him. "What happens now?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Morrison closed his file and looked directly at Marcus. "Now we need to determine whether it's safe for you to continue in your current role, or whether you need to be relocated for your own protection and the protection of others." Colonel Hewitt was already speaking quietly into her secure phone, using code words that Marcus recognized from his active service days. Within hours, his fate would be decided by people whose names he might never know, based on threat assessments and operational requirements that went far beyond his personal preferences. As the questioning continued, Marcus realized that the quiet life he had built over the past 3 years was ending. The shot that had saved lives and prevented a terrorist attack had also marked his return to a world he had tried to leave behind. His cover as a simple ceremonial guard was blown, his location was compromised, and his future was once again uncertain. But as he thought about the tourists who had gone home safely that day, the fellow guards who were alive because of his actions, and the terrorist attack that had been prevented. Marcus found that he had no regrets about the choice he had made. Sometimes duty required sacrifice, and sometimes the price of protecting others was the loss of the very thing you were trying to protect: your own peace and anonymity. 3 days after the terrorist incident, Marcus received orders that he had been both expecting and dreading. The call came at 0600 hours, delivered by a voice he recognized from his SAS days. Major David Sinclair, his former commanding officer, speaking with the clipped precision that meant urgent operational requirements. "What about my colleagues in the Queen's Guard?" Marcus asked. "They saw what I did. They know I'm not who I pretended to be." "Already handled," Sinclair assured him. "Official story is that you received advanced training during a classified exchange program with Allied forces. Your fellow guards have been briefed that your background remains classified for operational security reasons. They've been told to treat the incident as heroic but routine, and media access has been carefully controlled." Marcus nodded, appreciating the thoroughness of the cover story. His colleagues would have questions, but they were soldiers who understood the need for operational secrecy. "There's one more thing," Sinclair added, his tone becoming more serious. "The terrorist you stopped at the palace, he's been talking. Under interrogation, he revealed that the attack wasn't intended to kill you immediately. It was designed to force you into the open, to make you reveal your capabilities. Someone wanted confirmation that they had found the right target." The revelation sent a chill down Marcus's spine. The entire terrorist attack had been an elaborate test, a way to verify his identity and skills before launching a more comprehensive assassination attempt. The fact that innocent civilians had been put at risk for this purpose made his anger burn even hotter. "They used tourists and ceremonial guards as bait," Marcus said quietly. "They were willing to kill dozens of innocent people just to confirm my identity." "Exactly," Sinclair confirmed. "Which tells us we're dealing with people who have no moral boundaries and unlimited resources. This isn't going to end until we end it." Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the training grounds where he had spent years honing the skills that had made him both valuable and vulnerable. Soldiers were running obstacle courses, practicing close-quarters combat, and preparing for missions that would take them to the darkest corners of the world. He had hoped never to return to that life, but circumstances had made the choice for him. "When do I start?" he asked, turning back to Sinclair. "Immediately. We have a lead on one of the contractors involved in the surveillance operation. He's currently in Prague, meeting with potential clients. Your first mission is to extract information about who's funding these operations. Then eliminate the threat permanently." Sinclair handed Marcus a new identity packet: passport, credit cards, and background documents for someone named David Mitchell, a freelance security consultant with an unremarkable history. Full operational support will be provided through normal channels: weapons, transportation, intelligence, backup, whatever you need. "But Marcus," Sinclair's voice carried a warning, "this mission comes with unusual risks. These people know your methods, your capabilities, and your psychological profile. They'll be expecting someone with your skills to come after them." Marcus examined his new identity documents, noting the attention to detail that would make David Mitchell completely believable to anyone who investigated his background. "Then I'll have to be better than they expect." "There's something else you should know," Sinclair said, producing one final photograph. "The contractor you're going after in Prague, his name is Viktor Kozlov, former Spetsnaz, highly skilled, and he has personal reasons for wanting you dead." The photograph showed a man in his 40s with the hard features and calculating eyes of a professional killer. Marcus didn't recognize him immediately, but something about the face triggered a memory from years of classified operations. "Syria, 2019, Sinclair continued. "You eliminated a high-value target named Dmitry Kozlov, a weapons dealer who was supplying advanced military equipment to terrorist organizations. Victor is his younger brother, and he's been looking for revenge ever since." Marcus remembered the mission clearly. Dmitry Kozlov had been responsible for weapons shipments that had killed dozens of British soldiers and countless civilians. His elimination had been both necessary and justified, but Marcus had never considered that family members might seek personal revenge. "So this isn't just professional," Marcus said. "It's personal for him, which makes him more dangerous and more predictable," Sinclair replied. "He'll take risks to get to you that a purely professional operator wouldn't. We can use that against him." As Marcus prepared to leave Hereford and return to the world of covert operations, he reflected on the irony of his situation. His attempt to save lives as a Queen's Guard had revealed his identity to enemies, who were now more determined than ever to kill him. The peaceful life he had sought was gone forever, replaced by a mission that would require him to become the very thing he had tried to leave behind, a hunter and killer, operating in the shadows. But as he thought about his fallen comrades and the innocent people who remained at risk, Marcus found his resolve hardening. Sometimes peace could only be achieved through decisive action, and sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to eliminate those who threatened them. His war wasn't over. It had simply moved to a new battlefield. Thompson, pack light and report to Hereford by 1400 hours. Full debriefing required, followed by immediate reassignment. Your cover is blown beyond repair, and we have intelligence suggesting additional threats. Marcus had spent the intervening days in a safe house in Surrey, under constant protection, while intelligence analysts worked to determine the scope of the threat against him. The terrorist he had stopped turned out to be part of a larger network, with connections to several organizations that had reasons to want certain former SAS operatives dead. His 3 years of anonymity were over, and returning to active duty was the only option that offered both his safety and the country's security. The drive to Hereford brought back memories that Marcus had tried to bury. The base looked exactly as he remembered it, functional, secretive, and emanating an aura of quiet lethality that marked it as home to Britain's most elite soldiers. As his escort vehicle passed through multiple security checkpoints, Marcus felt the familiar mixture of pride and apprehension that came with returning to the world of special operations. Major Sinclair met him at the main building, his weathered face showing the strain of recent years in command. At 45, Sinclair had spent more than 2 decades in the SAS, and his experience showed in every line of his face and every measured movement. "Marcus," Sinclair said, extending his hand. "Good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances. We need to talk." They walked through corridors that Marcus knew by heart, past photos of fallen comrades and displays of unit history that told the story of decades of covert operations. The debriefing room was exactly as he remembered it, Spartan, secure, and designed for serious conversations about life and death matters. "Your little show at Buckingham Palace has created quite a stir," Sinclair began without preamble. "The media is calling you a hero, the palace is grateful, and the intelligence community is in full panic mode. That terrorist wasn't acting alone, and he definitely wasn't the only one looking for you." Marcus had suspected as much. The level of planning and resources required for the assassination attempt suggested a well-funded organization with significant intelligence capabilities. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked. Sinclair opened a classified file and spread several photographs across the table. "We've identified at least 3 separate groups with active bounties on your head. The Taliban remnants from your Afghanistan operations, a Syrian militia whose leader you eliminated in 2019, and most concerning, a private military contractor that appears to have been hired specifically to track down former SAS snipers." The photographs showed surveillance images from multiple locations around London, all taken in the weeks before the palace incident. Marcus recognized some of the faces, known operatives from various hostile organizations, all apparently working together to locate and eliminate him. "The contractor angle is what worries us most," Sinclair continued. "These aren't ideologically motivated terrorists. They're professionals being paid by someone with very deep pockets and very specific information about our operations. Someone leaked details about your service record, your skills, and your location. The implications were chilling. If classified information about SAS operations was being sold to hostile entities, then every member of the unit could be at risk. Marcus's exposure might be just the beginning of a larger campaign against British Special Forces." "What's the plan?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Immediate reactivation to active duty," Sinclair replied. "New identity, new assignment, and most importantly, we're going to turn this situation to our advantage. Instead of hiding from these people, we're going to hunt them down." Sinclair turned to a map of Europe and the Middle East, marked with various colored pins indicating known hostile activities. "Operation Nightfall has been authorized at the highest levels. Your mission is to eliminate the network that's been targeting our people. You'll have full resources, complete operational freedom, and authorization to use whatever methods are necessary." Marcus studied the map, his tactical mind already analyzing the scope of the mission. It would require months of careful planning, extensive intelligence gathering, and ultimately, a return to the kind of precision killing that had made him legendary within the Special Forces community. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "I requested transfer to the Queen's Guard specifically because I wanted to serve without killing. I was tired of the constant violence, the moral weight of taking lives. Are there no other options?" Sinclair's expression softened slightly, showing a hint of the man behind the commanding officer. "Marcus, I understand your reluctance, but these people won't stop hunting you or other members of this unit until they're eliminated. This isn't about revenge, it's about protection. Every day these networks remain operational, more of our people are at risk." The Major pulled out another file, this one containing intelligence reports from multiple sources. 3 former SAS operatives have been killed in the past 6 months. All of them were living quiet civilian lives, trying to stay anonymous just like you were. But they were tracked down and eliminated by professional assassins. If we don't act now, you'll either spend the rest of your life in hiding, or you'll end up like them. Marcus absorbed this information with growing anger. The men who had been killed were good soldiers who had served their country with distinction and deserved to live their lives in peace. The fact that they had been hunted down and murdered for their past service was both infuriating and unacceptable. "Who's backing these operations?" Marcus asked. "That's what we need you to find out," Sinclair replied. "The intelligence suggests a coordinated effort involving multiple hostile nations and non-state actors. Someone is paying a lot of money to eliminate British Special Forces personnel, and we need to know who and why." Marcus looked at the photographs again, studying the faces of men who had marked him for death. Some he recognized from his operational days. Targets who had escaped, associates of people he had eliminated, enemies who had good reason to want him dead. But others were unfamiliar, suggesting that his reputation had spread far beyond the specific operations he had conducted. Prague in October was cold and gray, the perfect environment for the kind of work that David Mitchell, formerly Marcus Thompson, had been sent to accomplish. He sat in a cafe overlooking Wenceslas Square, watching the entrance to the Hotel Augustine, where Viktor Kozlov was staying. 3 days of surveillance had established the Russians' patterns: morning runs through the old city, afternoon meetings in various locations, and evening meals at expensive restaurants where he conducted business with clients whose faces Marcus photographed for later intelligence analysis. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that he was once again operating alone in a foreign city, relying on skills he had hoped never to use again. But the intelligence gathered over the past week had convinced him that this mission was absolutely necessary. Kozlov wasn't just seeking personal revenge. He was coordinating a comprehensive campaign to eliminate British Special Forces personnel across Europe. Marcus's earpiece crackled with the voice of Sarah Chen, who had been assigned as his intelligence coordinator for the operation. Her promotion to liaison between MI5 and Special Operations had been rapid, based partly on her performance during the Buckingham Palace incident. "Target is moving," Chen reported from her observation post across the square, leaving the hotel with 2 associates heading toward the Jewish quarter. "This matches the pattern from yesterday. He's going to meet his financier." Marcus adjusted his position, maintaining visual contact while appearing to read a newspaper. The 2 associates were clearly bodyguards. Large men with the alert, posture and concealed weapons that marked them as professionals. But Marcus had identified their weaknesses during previous observations. They were competent, but not exceptional, trained for urban security rather than counter-surveillance operations. "Copy that," Marcus replied quietly. "Any word on the identity of the financier?" "Partial confirmation through facial recognition," Chen responded. "Appears to be Hassan al-Rashid, a Saudi businessman with suspected ties to terrorist financing networks. If he's bankrolling these operations, we're looking at a much larger conspiracy than we initially thought." Marcus felt his pulse quicken slightly. Al-Rashid was a name that had appeared in multiple intelligence briefings over the years. A shadowy figure who used his legitimate business empire to fund various militant groups around the world. If he was involved in targeting British Special Forces, it suggested that someone at the highest levels of international terrorism had decided that eliminating SAS operatives was a strategic priority. Following at a discreet distance, Marcus tracked Kozlov's group through the narrow streets of Prague's historic center. The city's medieval architecture provided excellent cover for surveillance, but it also created multiple ambush opportunities and escape routes that made any confrontation unpredictable. The meeting took place in a private room at a restaurant near the Old Town Square. Marcus positioned himself at a neighboring establishment where he could observe the entrance while Chen monitored from a different angle. Through carefully positioned listening devices, they were able to capture fragments of the conversation taking place inside. What they heard confirmed their worst fears. Al-Rashid wasn't just funding revenge operations against individual soldiers. He was financing a comprehensive intelligence network designed to identify and eliminate every former SAS operative who had participated in missions against his interests. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking, involving corrupt officials in multiple countries, private military contractors, and terrorist cells across 3 continents. "We need to take them now," Chen's voice came through the earpiece. "If they complete this meeting, the information will be distributed to operational cells throughout Europe." Marcus considered the tactical situation. 3 targets, 2 bodyguards, civilian area with limited escape routes. Under normal circumstances, he would prefer to wait for a better opportunity, but the intelligence they had gathered made immediate action necessary. "Negative," Marcus replied. "Too many civilians, too much risk of collateral damage. We wait for them to separate." An hour later, opportunity presented itself. Kozlov left the restaurant alone, walking toward a car parked several blocks away. Al-Rashid remained behind with the bodyguards, apparently planning to leave separately as a security precaution. Marcus made his decision. "I'm taking Kozlov. Coordinate with local police to detain Al-Rashid for questioning. Immigration violations. Anything that will hold him for 48 hours. Understood. Be careful, Marcus. Kozlov knows you're coming for him eventually." Marcus shadowed Kozlov through increasingly narrow streets, waiting for the perfect moment. The Russian was skilled and alert, periodically checking for surveillance, but he was operating in an unfamiliar city and couldn't watch every angle simultaneously. The confrontation came in a small alley behind the National Theater. Kozlov had stopped to make a phone call, his attention momentarily focused on the conversation. Marcus approached from behind, moving with the silent precision that had made him legendary within the SAS. "Viktor Kozlov," Marcus said quietly in Russian, causing the man to freeze. "We need to talk." Kozlov turned slowly, his hand moving toward a concealed weapon. His face showed no surprise. He had been expecting this moment since the Buckingham Palace incident had revealed Marcus's continued existence. "The famous Marcus Thompson," Kozlov replied in accented English. "The ghost who killed my brother." "Your brother was a weapons dealer who supplied terrorists," Marcus said evenly. "He was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of innocent people." "He was family," Kozlov shot back, his hand now resting on his gun. "And family demands justice." Marcus could see the calculation in Kozlov's eyes. The Russian was weighing his chances of drawing and firing before Marcus could react. It was a calculation that many men had made over the years, and none had made it successfully. "Victor," Marcus said calmly, "I'm going to give you one chance to surrender. Provide information about who's funding these operations and you'll live to see trial. Refuse, and this ends here." Kozlov laughed bitterly. "You think I fear death? I've been hunting you for 2 years, planning every detail of how I would kill you. Do you really think I'll give up now?" "I think you're smarter than your brother was," Marcus replied. "He chose violence and died for it. You can choose differently." For a moment, uncertainty flickered in Kozlov's eyes. Marcus could see the internal struggle between vengeance and survival, between the desire for revenge and the instinct for self-preservation. The moment of hesitation ended when Kozlov's phone rang. The sound startled him, causing his hand to jerk toward his weapon. Marcus reacted instantly, his own gun appearing in his hand faster than the eye could follow. The shot was precise and final, striking Kozlov's center mass before the Russian could clear his holster. As Kozlov collapsed, Marcus quickly searched his pockets for intelligence materials. What he found confirmed their worst fears. Detailed files on dozens of former SAS operatives, complete with current identities, locations, and family information. The conspiracy was even larger than they had suspected. "Target neutralized," Marcus reported through his earpiece. "Recovering intelligence materials. This network is bigger than we thought." Chen's response was tense. "Local police lost al-Rashid. He spotted the surveillance and disappeared. We've got teams searching, but he's gone." Marcus felt a surge of frustration. Eliminating Kozlov was necessary, but losing al-Rashid meant that the conspiracy would continue operating. Other cells would still be hunting his former colleagues, and new contractors would be recruited to replace the ones they eliminated. As he prepared to extract from Prague, Marcus realized that this mission was just the beginning. The network targeting British Special Forces was vast and well-funded, with tentacles reaching into legitimate businesses, government agencies, and criminal organizations around the world. Stopping it would require more than eliminating individual operatives. It would require dismantling the entire structure piece by piece. But as he thought about his fallen comrades and the colleagues who remained at risk, Marcus felt his resolve strengthening. He had tried to leave the world of violence behind, but that world had refused to let him go. Now he would embrace his role as hunter and protector, using every skill he had learned to ensure that good soldiers could live their lives in peace. The war for the safety of British Special Forces was far from over, but Marcus Thompson was no longer hiding from it. He was fighting back with everything he had, and he would not stop until every threat was eliminated. 6 months after the Prague operation, Marcus stood once again in the familiar surroundings of Hereford Base, but this time in the conference room, reserved for mission debriefings at the highest classification levels. The walls were lined with secured communication equipment, and the table was covered with files documenting one of the most successful counterintelligence operations in recent SAS history. Operation Nightfall had exceeded all expectations. What had begun as a mission to eliminate threats against individual operatives had evolved into a comprehensive dismantling of a terrorist financing network that spanned 3 continents. The intelligence recovered from Viktor Kozlov's files had been the key that unlocked a conspiracy involving 12 different organizations, corrupt officials in 7 countries, and financing mechanisms that had been used to fund terrorist activities for more than a decade. Major Sinclair sat across from Marcus, his expression showing both satisfaction and exhaustion. The operation had required months of careful coordination between multiple intelligence agencies, and the results had been extraordinary. 37 terrorist operatives eliminated, 14 financing networks dismantled, and over £50 million in terrorist assets seized. Hassan al-Rashid was captured in Beirut 3 weeks ago, Sinclair reported, consulting his files. Lebanese intelligence cooperated fully once we shared what we had learned about his activities. He's providing detailed information about the financing structure in exchange for avoiding extradition to the United States. Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of closure that had been building throughout the operation. Al-Rashid's capture had been the final piece of the puzzle, the culmination of months of patient intelligence work and precisely executed operations. "What about the other former SAS personnel who were targeted?" Marcus asked. "All accounted for and safe," Sinclair replied with obvious relief. "We identified 43 individuals who were on various target lists. They've all been relocated with new identities, or provided with enhanced security depending on their circumstances. The threat against our people has been effectively neutralized." Sarah Chen, who had been promoted to Senior Intelligence Coordinator based on her performance during Nightfall, entered the room carrying additional files. Her work had been instrumental in tracking the financial networks that had made the conspiracy possible. "The broader impact has been significant," Chen reported. "Dismantling these financing networks has disrupted terrorist operations across the Middle East and North Africa. Conservative estimates suggest we've prevented dozens of attacks and saved hundreds of lives." Marcus felt a satisfaction that was different from anything he had experienced during his original SAS service. During his years as an active sniper, success had been measured in individual targets eliminated, specific threats neutralized. But Operation Nightfall had achieved something larger, the protection of innocent people on a scale that went far beyond any single mission. "There's been a development regarding your future assignment?" Sinclair continued, his tone becoming more formal. "Given the success of Nightfall and your demonstrated capabilities in complex operations, you've been offered a new position. Sinclair handed Marcus a sealed envelope bearing the insignia of the Cabinet Office. Inside was a letter signed by officials whose names Marcus recognized from newspaper headlines. Senior figures in the intelligence community who rarely involved themselves in operational details. The letter was brief, but comprehensive. Marcus was being offered command of a new counter-terrorism unit that would operate with unprecedented autonomy and resources. The unit would be tasked with identifying and eliminating terrorist threats before they could develop into active operations, using methods and authorities that went beyond traditional military or police capabilities. It's essentially a license to do what you've been doing for the past 6 months, Sinclair explained, but with official backing and unlimited resources. You'd be responsible for protecting not just British interests, but coordinating with allied nations to prevent terrorist attacks worldwide. Marcus read the letter twice, absorbing the implications of what was being offered. Command of an elite unit, operational autonomy, and the opportunity to prevent terrorist attacks before they could harm innocent people. It was everything a career soldier could want, the culmination of years of training and experience. But as he considered the offer, Marcus's thoughts returned to a morning 6 months earlier, when he had stood guard outside Buckingham Palace, watching tourists take photographs and children laugh at the pageantry of the changing of the guard. He remembered the sense of peace that had come with serving without killing, the satisfaction of protecting through presence rather than violence. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "I'm honored by this offer, but I need to ask about one alternative." Sinclair raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting hesitation about such a prestigious assignment. "What if I wanted to return to the Queen's Guard?" The question seemed to surprise everyone in the room. Chen looked puzzled, and Sinclair's expression shifted to one of confusion. "Marcus," Sinclair said slowly, "you've just completed one of the most successful operations in the history of British intelligence. You've proven yourself capable of leading complex international missions. Why would you want to return to ceremonial duties?" Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the training grounds where new recruits were learning the skills that might one day take them to battlefields around the world. He thought about the cyclical nature of violence, the way that eliminating one threat always seemed to generate new ones, and the exhaustion that came from years of constant warfare. "Because," Marcus said finally, "sometimes the most important service you can provide is to stand guard over the things that make life worth living. The tourists at Buckingham Palace aren't there to see weapons or warfare. They come to see tradition, pageantry, and the idea that some things remain constant in a chaotic world." He turned back to face the room. "Operation Nightfall was necessary, and I'm proud of what we accomplished. But I became a Queen's Guard because I wanted to protect the peaceful world that our operations make possible. I want to go back to that." Sinclair considered this for several minutes, clearly struggling to understand why someone would choose ceremonial duty over command of an elite unit. But Chen seemed to grasp Marcus's reasoning immediately. "You want to be visible," she said. "You want potential threats to know that Britain's guardians are always present, always watching, always ready to act if necessary." Marcus nodded. "Exactly. The terrorists who targeted me learned that even ceremonial guards can be deadly when necessary. That's a message worth sending." After additional discussion and consultation with higher authorities, Marcus's request was approved with unusual conditions. He would return to the Queen's Guard with his real identity acknowledged by his colleagues and superiors. His presence would serve as both protection and deterrent, a reminder that Britain's most elite soldiers could be found in the most unexpected places. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood once again outside Buckingham Palace, wearing the familiar red tunic and bearskin hat. But this time his fellow guards knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. The jokes and ridicule had been replaced by respect and camaraderie based on shared knowledge of his true service record. Warrant Officer Palmer, who had been fully briefed on Marcus's background and recent operations, approached him during a break between ceremonies. "Thompson," Palmer said with obvious respect. "Or should I say, Commander Thompson?" Marcus smiled. "Just Thompson is fine, sir. Same as always." "The lads wanted me to ask you something," Palmer continued. "Would you be willing to provide some advanced training? Help improve our readiness in case we face another situation like the terrorist incident?" Marcus considered the request. Training his fellow guards would mean sharing some of the skills that had taken him years to develop, but it would also mean ensuring that they were better prepared to protect themselves and others if threats arose. "I'd be honored," Marcus replied. As the afternoon ceremony began and tourists gathered to watch the changing of the guard, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him back to this point. He had left the palace as a man trying to escape his past, had been forced to confront enemies who wanted him dead, and had returned as someone who understood that true strength sometimes meant choosing service over glory, protection over recognition. The red tunic he wore was the same, the ceremonial duties unchanged, but Marcus himself was different. He was no longer hiding from his past or running from his skills. Instead, he had found a way to use his abilities in service of the peaceful world that made ceremonies like this possible. Standing guard outside Buckingham Palace, Marcus Thompson had found his true calling, not as a hunter in the shadows, but as a protector in plain sight, ensuring that the traditions and values he had fought to defend could continue for future generations to witness and admire.